Hello, everybody. We are less than a week away from Rogue One, and I'm super freaking excited. So, I want to talk about Rogue One. I want to talk about some of the theories I have, and I want to talk about Star Wars Catalyst because last night I finished Catalyst, which is the Rogue One book that came out about last month, middle of last month, from James Luceno, and it's a fabulous book. It's easily my favorite new canon book they've come out with. It's the best written one, and it introduces now my favorite villain in the Star Wars universe. So there's a lot of good that came out of this book. So I want to talk about what happened in the book. So if you're someone who is planning on reading it before Rogue One comes out, then tune out now. If you are going to read it in the future, but you don't really a synopsis won't hurt it for you, or rather, if you want to, catch up on what happens in Catalyst before going and seeing Rogue One, and you just don't have the time to sit down and read the book, then this is probably a really good video for you. Or the alternative option is if you've already read the book and you just want to talk about the book or listen to someone else talk about the book and see what their thoughts are, then this is also probably good for you. We are going to talk about Rogue One, and I do have some theories that I'm going to interject there. But that being said, I'm going to try to avoid talking about Rogue One as much as possible in any deep sense, because I'm the kind of person that doesn't want to be spoiled. And there's been clips, there's one of the flashback clips in Rogue One has been released. I don't remember where it was, and I went to go watch it and I decided against it. I got about 3 seconds into it and I was like, no, I don't need to see it. I'm gonna wait until the movie comes out because there's no reason for me to see this. I want to just go in fresh and have that experience. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about Rogue One, but I'm gonna try again to avoid going too deep into it because it's in a week we're going to see the movie, and I don't want to try to even ruin the movie for me by trying to start theorizing things, and maybe coming up with things that are or are not true about the movie. So let's back it up. Let's start with Rogue One stuff. In fact, let's just get this out of the way because there are certain things that we know are going to happen in Rogue One at the end of Rogue One that just we know because either from episode 4 or just from things that we already know within the Star Wars universe. For example, Darth Vader lives in Rogue One. I know it's spoilers, because he's in episode 4, 5, and 6. So we know that Darth Vader lives through the experience of Rogue One. We know they steal the Death Star plans. Why do we know that? Because it tells us in the episode 4 title crawl that there was a victory, a minor victory or a major victory, and that they stole the Death Star plans. So we know that they get the Death Star plans. What we don't know is who of them lives. That's another thing we need to discuss, and it's something I'm going to get into. And then finally, there's a couple other characters that we know are just going to make it through this, like Mon Mothma, which we see in the movie as a part of the movie in some degree. She's been in several of the trailers, but we know she makes it through, so that's a thing as well. So there's just certain things from Rogue One that we know are going to happen because this is a standalone story, but it is set in a period of time that we know what the outcome of all this is. Spoiler alert, the Empire gets defeated and the First Order is birthed out of that. Right? So let's talk about Catalyst now that that's out of the way. So Catalyst is a book that takes place much further back than Rogue One. It starts during the Clone War era, when the Clone War is really pretty much right in its midpoint. There's points in the beginning of the book that are talking about Count Dooku and the Separatists, and it gets to the point where certain characters visit the that stupid, dang it, what's the world name? Geonosis. So they visit there. They see the Geonosians. They employ them to, one of the characters employs them at one point. So this is after the battle at Geonosis and all that happens, and after the Separatists. So basically after the events of episode 2. So there are, a lot of things that end up happening within that story, and basically everything that everything that happens in the Clone Wars, it goes through, and there's a lot of time jumps in this book. So we get through the Clone War era, it gets through to when the Emperor takes over, and this is just things happening in the background of the book. The Emperor, or Palpatine, takes over as the Emperor, and then that slow squeezing grip of the Empire starts happening, and it gets to the point where the Death Star is being created. And well, actually, the Death Star is kind of technically being created throughout the entire book, but it gets to the point where it is like actually almost done, and they do even a test of a weapon system before actually building it. So it does get further on past episode 3, not necessarily in the midpoint, but somewhere in between episode 3 and episode 4 is like where that story ends in Catalyst, before Rogue One, quite a ways before Rogue One, when Jin, who is the main character in Rogue One, when she's just like, a few years old, really, where she can talk and she's a part of the story, but she's not necessarily super old and she doesn't understand what's going on. That's when Catalyst ends. So what exactly happens in Catalyst? There's some big players. The first is, I'm just going to list off some of the characters that we're going to talk about here. So there's Galen Erso, which is Jin's father. And then there's his wife, Lyra, so Jin's mother. And there's obviously Jin. She's in it as a baby, as an unborn baby, and then a baby, and then kind of like a young child, because again, there's time jumps. And then there's Krennic, which is the Imperial officer in all white in all the trailers that you see, the guy that says like the power that we are, like he nails that line, first of all. Secondly, he's awesome. We'll talk about him. Even Tarkin is in the books. As not necessarily a primary character, but a character that does matter in the book because he is a bit of a rival to Krennic. Then there's some background, like name drops. There's Darth Vader name drops that, they mention Tarkin and Darth Vader kind of following around with Tarkin, or rather Tarkin following around with Darth Vader. And then they mention Palpatine several times and stuff like that. So there are some big name drops, but the main characters we are dealing with in Catalyst are Galen, Lyra, Jin, and Krennic. But the 3 that we're really going to talk about in detail are Galen, Lyra, and Krennic, because that's what the story is centered around. The story begins during that Clone War era where Galen is at a research facility. And essentially what he is trying to do, his research involves him finding a way to give a way of clean energy. It actually kind of makes sense in our world today. It sounds like it's a story that you could take out of, our timeline in our world. But essentially, he's trying to find a better way to provide power for the galaxy. And the way he's doing this is he's researching utilizing kyber crystals. And kyber crystals are obviously the things that are used in lightsabers. But there's a difference with this because he's trying to manufacture his own kyber crystals. He's trying to copy them at the beginning of the book, and he's on a facility. Well, what ends up happening is the Separatists, are kind of a part of what's going on the planet, and there's the Republic, or what becomes the Empire, going against them, and you have this research facility on this planet. He ends up being imprisoned for some time on the planet. While he's imprisoned, he's still trying to work a little bit on his research and what he was doing there, but essentially his wife is also imprisoned. They're imprisoned in a way that they're kept away from each other, and there's some weird like blackmailing going on. But in this facility, when they are imprisoned, Lyra has her baby. So Jin is born in this prison technically. She's not actually being held prisoner. It's mostly just Galen. A lot of this is just like background stuff going on, but the main plot is that Galen is working on trying to find a clean source of energy. That's his thing. We learn throughout the book that he was really brilliant growing up, and he goes really deep into thought, and everything that happens when he's like thinking really hard and researching things, he kind of shuts people out almost. But he certainly loves his wife, and he's certainly excited to have a kid. So when his old buddy, who he was basically went to college with, we can call it that, Krennic, shows up and busts them out of this jail. So he does a deal with the people on the planet, he's basically showing that he's a part of this company, this like research company that was funding Galen, although he is lying, Krennic is, and he manages to get the planet to turn over Galen, Lyra, and Jin. They get on this ship with the help of a smuggler that Krennic has employed, and they get off the planet. And when they do that, they pretty much turn around and just destroy the planet behind them. Now, Galen is not very happy with this, but Krennic is explaining how, he's working for the Republic and the Separatists are getting out of hand and yada, yada, yada. There's a war going on between, it's the Clone Wars is essentially what's going on in the background. Now, this is when Krennic, to me, becomes my favorite villain in the Star Wars universe, because this is when we start seeing that he has a very, very long game here. He understands, because he has plans to build the Death Star. He's not part of the Separatists, right? And the Separatists, like Count Dooku and stuff, have the plans to build the Death Star, and we see that in Episode 2 and everything. But there's something going on in the background, which I can only assume is Palpatine manipulating both sides, because we know that's kind of what he did this entire time, and had the plans and gave them over somehow, so that way the Republic also wanted to build this Death Star to beat the Separatists and to enforce the galaxy. And we know that that's what the Empire ends up doing anyway, so it works out well for them. But Krennic has these plans, and he's an engineer. He went to school as an engineer. That's just what he is. And he is now working for the military. And Galen is more of a pacifist. So they come out ahead of each other. Galen doesn't really want to be a part of anything that Krennic's a part of. And Galen's trying to convince his old friend, like, hey, you're doing the wrong thing here. And Krennic is just like, I assure you, this is all for peace. We're doing this for peace. We're trying to bring peace to the galaxy, right? And from minute one, when Krennic enters the scene and starts talking to Galen, this is all just a giant manipulation, and it's beautifully orchestrated, because he's telling Galen that, there's a potential that I could use you in the future for using your research and making you have a job where you can go and provide power for people across the galaxy by continuing your research. And they set this up from the beginning as Krennic already planting these seeds, knowing full well that he may need him in the future for this design of this battle station. And it's at this point that, they split ways after Krennic saves Galen and Lyra, and Galen and Lyra kind of go off on their own and work on a little bit of research, and they're kind of working here and there on Coruscant, but they're not necessarily enjoying themselves, you might say. And Jin is slowly growing up, but it's during this time that Krennic goes to Geonosis, and he goes and he kind of employs them to start building parts of the Death Star. So what's happening is there are, the Republic is going around, and it quickly becomes the Empire. We get to the end of the Clone War era, and they've gone and basically taken certain planets and are farming the heck out of them. They are getting all the resources they can to build the Death Star. And time progresses to the point where Krennic returns to Galen and just says, hey, I have a job for you. I know that you've been bored, but I've got the perfect solution. Can you work on this project that I am heading up called Project Celestial Power? And he's like, that sounds great. What is this? It's like, basically, you're going to provide power for the rest of the galaxy. It's your dream. It's what you wanted to do. And the key here is, this is kind of in the narration of the book, is Krennic wants Galen to believe that this, working for him and working on this project, is his destiny. And he does a beautiful job of setting it up through a lot of manipulation. Lyra, his wife, is very suspicious of the entire thing, is very suspicious of Krennic and doesn't really appreciate anything he's doing. But throughout the rest of the book, Krennic is just manipulating them beautifully. And it gets to the point where the Death Star is nearly built. There's a lot of stuff done with it. It's not like, complete and functional, but they're getting to the point where its primary skeleton is built up. And Galen, this entire time working on this Project Celestial Power, is creating this really awesome research on Coruscant of how he can get the power out of these kyber crystals. And at the end of the Clone Wars, when the Empire becomes a thing and the Emperor takes over. We know that the Jedi Order falls and Order 66 happens. And essentially, when Galen gets his research going and he's like devoted to this, he suddenly starts getting all these kyber crystals and he's looking at some are small and some are huge, and he's realizing some look like they were used as like wall sconces and decoration and stuff. And he starts putting the pieces together that, oh, you know what? These are probably from the Jedi. And he's not dumb. Like, he puts it together and realizes that that's the case, but he kind of pushes it off like, oh, well, the Jedi were hiding the power behind these crystals because they didn't want anybody to have this power. They were holding it for themselves, and they didn't understand that we could power the galaxy. And all of these things, all these thoughts that Galen are having were placed in his head by Krennic. And again, Krennic showing why he's my favorite villain. He orchestrates this from the very beginning over the course of several years, getting Galen to believe in Krennic's mission. Now, Lyra, on the opposite side of things, I would say she is a person who believes in the Force. She's not Force sensitive. Neither is Jin, neither is Galen, or any of the characters that we really see in this book, except for Darth Vader, though we never really see him. He's just kind of mentioned. So the Force is something that Lyra believes exists, and she even mentions like feeling it, and she loves going outdoors and stuff. So she's one of those kind of people who I would say is a sympathizer to the Jedi, and she's really sad when she hears what happened to the Jedi, and she's even more heartbroken when she sees all the kyber crystals coming to her husband Galen and how he's using them for his research. She understands the weight of that. And I'll get back to that when we start talking a little bit about Rogue One. But essentially, what's happening is Galen's continuing on with his research, and he's providing, because he has his own facility on Coruscant, and he's providing all this data to Krennic and his team. And essentially, Galen knows that there's other research facilities. So he's coming up with like the ideological stuff. He's coming up with theories about how these kyber crystals will work and how they can harness power and how they can amplify power and all this stuff. But he understands that they are a living crystal and they seem more like a living being than they are like a mineral. And he's going over all this stuff and he's sending this data out to these other facilities. What he doesn't know is these other facilities that are working for Krennic are not working on ways to store power. They're working on ways to create a weapon. That's their mission. Krennic has tasked them with building a weapon, and many of them are under the impression that either Galen is like in on this or doesn't know, and Krennic has like threatened those people with don't ever tell Galen this or don't ever try to contact him or anything like that. And he locks people out and he separates people enough that this information never gets back to Galen. So it gets to the point later on in the book, and this kind of like we're getting towards the end of the book here, that he that Krennic goes and he gets that amount of research. And there's been many research facilities that have been completely destroyed in this. A war has broken out on a planet, and there's just a lot of stuff going on in the like ulterior setting here, where Krennic is manipulating things and essentially gets a point where he can test fire the weapon. And he does. He fires it into a black hole, and it's way beyond their imagination of what it could have been. And he gets really excited. Now he just needs to kind of make the final jump here. And this is really when the Tarkin-Krennic, rivalry starts happening. Because essentially you have Tarkin, who wants to be the head of the Imperial fleet and the Navy and everything, and he wants to control everything. But he knows about this little station, this battle station project that Krennic's been working on. And Krennic sees this as his way to come to power and to basically be the leader of this battle station, and where it's his and he, owns it essentially. But Tarkin does see that as part of the military, and Tarkin wants a piece of that pie. So towards the end of the book, Krennic does a brilliant job of having Tarkin get involved in this small war with these rebels, these separatists, whatever you want to call them, on the fringe of the galaxy, and ties him up there because he knows that Tarkin will want to fight and want to crush these people. But it's about halfway through this battle that Tarkin realizes what's going on and essentially tries to speed things up. He knows that he needs to finish this up in order to stop Krennic with whatever he's doing with Galen and getting this battle station operational. By this point, Krennic has visited Lyra several times, clandestinely, and even threatened Lyra and basically her entire family, including Jyn, that if she tries to disrupt what's going on with Galen and tries to get him to not continue his research in any ways by distracting him or planting doubts in his mind, then he'll have no option but to remove her in some way from the equation. So this actually is probably a bad move on Krennic because it starts putting those doubts in her mind, and eventually she starts reaching out to old researchers that her and Galen knew, and people that they knew especially that were working on this project Celestial Power, and some of them have gone missing. Either they're dead or they've been, reassigned or whatever. Lyra doesn't know, but she knows that something's going on, and she starts getting very suspicious, and Galen starts getting very suspicious. And it's at the end of the book that right at the end, Tarkin gets in on this too. Tarkin gets his fingers on the smuggler from the beginning of the book, who kind of makes his way throughout the book here and there as kind of like a tertiary character, but plays an important role at the end for creating a distraction for Krennic. So Tarkin basically understands essentially what's going on, and Galen and Lyra are debating back and forth whether or not they should continue with this. They realize that they're working on a weapon system and not on storing power. So Galen and Lyra decide to get up and leave, but they needed a bit of a distraction. So they take off out of Coruscant, where Krennic was and still is, and had just visited them, essentially. He walks out and they're like, okay, we got to go now. And they start leaving. And that's when Tarkin contacts Krennic and is like, oh, the smuggler that you used to work with. And Krennic's like, no, I don't work with him anymore, like denying everything, being like, no, he's a fringe character, I don't understand. And Tarkin is like, oh yeah, well, he's on his way to Coruscant after we took him custody. He got away, unfortunately. Ooh, that sucks. But he sent a message to meet somebody at the spaceport, and Krennic is thinking like, oh crap, what the heck's going on? Why is this guy coming to see me? So he goes and essentially tries to stop whatever's going on. But then he realizes, oh no, this smuggler, he's not coming to see me. He's coming to get Galen and Lyra, who he has been, fairly close with throughout the entire book. So he goes back to Galen and Lyra. They're already gone. Now he's panicking. Krennic goes straight to the spaceport, finds the smuggler, and the smuggler's like, I came here for you, boss. I wanted to see if you can help me out here because you helped me out so much in the past, and now you kind of screwed me over with this like betrayal out on the Outer Rim with this war that was going on, and Tarkin almost getting me. And then what we see is that Tarkin pulls just a brilliant maneuver here with the smuggler, because the smuggler has one of his guys go and pick up Galen and Lyra and essentially get them off planet. And the book ends with this third smuggler, this guy who is like a fourth character in the book. Like, he's way far back in the list of characters here. But he gets Galen and Lyra and Jyn off the planet and goes and hides them on a fairly nice green planet, but way out of the way. And it essentially ends with them knowing that Krennic is going to stop at nothing to find Galen. This is never going to end. This hunt for Galen is never going to get out of Krennic's mind. And that's how the end the book. Essentially, Krennic manipulates Galen masterfully throughout the entire book, is such a fantastic and ruthless bad guy in ways that you can only really visualize if you go and read Catalyst. And then Tarkin and Krennic are having these back and forths that are just beautiful. There are things of beauty that make me just love the Empire even more than what I already do. And I'm excited to get into Rogue One because we know that Tarkin at the end of episode or at the beginning of episode 4 is in charge of this battle station. Essentially, he is like the guy, the head honcho, and he even dismisses, Darth Vader's stuff with his like crazy force powers. He's like, yeah, it's a stupid religion. It's all this really cool stuff that happens in episode 4 that we're gonna see come to fruition in Rogue One, because Krennic in Rogue One is clearly in charge of the Death Star. So what happens that he isn't? Maybe it is that Tarkin just pulls an even better maneuver and finally gets Krennic down, or maybe it is that Jyn comes in as this third character who Krennic has interacted with in the past and clearly interacts with in the movie because of the flashbacks. We see several flashbacks with Galen, which I just realized he's always like, it's always raining in those flashbacks, but we see a flashback where Krennic finds Galen and essentially confronts him, and he has all his like death troopers with him, and he's like telling Galen, like, you gotta, this was your destiny, you were working on this project, why did you leave, and all this stuff. So we know that Galen is the one who created this system. So whether or not Krennic brings Galen back and forces him to work for him or not, we don't know. We're going to find that on Rogue One. But eventually, obviously, the weapon system does get working. So this is when my theories for Rogue One come in. I want to talk a little bit about it, but again, I don't want to get too far into it. My theory is that Krennic does find Galen, brings him in to the fold, and forces Galen to work for Krennic to build this weapon, or at least get it functional in some degree, or else he'll kill Jyn or Lyra, even, for that matter, which is fascinating. We do see Lyra in the movie at one point. In one of the trailers, she gives young Jyn a kyber crystal, and then in older Jyn form, we see that kyber crystal as that necklace. So it is kind of cool that it does connect into the book that way. Like, there's, that they're working on the kyber crystals, and that's what their research was. So it is cool to have that transfer into Rogue One. But that is, in fact, my theory, where I think that Galen is going to be taken in by Krennic, and Galen is going to be forced to work for Krennic in some way, probably at the behest of Jyn. So, with that in mind, we're going to get to the point now, out of the flashback clips, or whatever you want to call them, where Jyn joins the rebellion. Whatever happens there, I don't know. I don't want to know. I want to see that and experience that for myself. But there are some fascinating things that happen because, again, we know that they steal the Death Star plans. We know that in the trailers, they say that there's an imminent weapons test and it's, they need to try to stop it or whatever. I don't think that they're going to stop the weapons test. I do think that there's going to be several battles that happen. And I do think that they are going to get the Death Star plans, because that's how this is going to work. That might be their victory. But in the process, I think almost every single one of these characters in this movie is going to die. I do not think they're going to make it out. I think if anyone makes it out, it's going to be Jyn. But I think she, too, is either going to die, or we're going to see Galen and Lyra dead in some fashion, and maybe Jyn carries on. Maybe we get another movie with Jyn later on in the Rebel, as another Rebel story. Maybe like she was on the Battle of Hoth or whatever. We don't know. I doubt it. Again, I think that everybody is going to die. I don't think we're going to see anyone make it out of this movie alive. Obviously, someone has to, because someone has to bring the plans back. It's either going to be the droid, which I think is K2. I think that will be hilarious if that's what happens, or it's going to be Jyn. Everybody else, to me, is expendable and is probably going to die. But Krennic, my favorite villain of all time, I'm heartbroken because I know that he's going to die, and that sucks. But he did such a masterful job of setting this all up that you see his work just magnified through episode 4, 5, and 6, even though the Death Star blows up at the beginning of episode 4, or the end of episode 4, even through episode 5, when they're rebuilding the Death Star, and in episode 6, when we get the Death Star rebuilt mostly, that's all because of Krennic. All of this research and getting this weapon online and everything was because of Krennic. And I think that's really important to remember, that he's the one who started all this. And of course, we didn't know that when episode 4 came out, or episode 5 or 6, and this is all stuff that's interjected in after the fact, but it makes me really excited for more movies like this that kind of explain the fringe stuff. So just finally, I want to touch on a couple things that I know about Rogue One, or that I assume about Rogue One. The first is I really hope they don't have a title crawl. I don't think it works for this kind of movie. I don't want them to do it. I don't want them to do it for the Han Solo film, which is a weird way to say that. I don't want them to do it for a Boba Fett film if they end up doing that, or an Obi-Wan film. Like, I don't want any title crawl for Star Wars story films, not saga films. I think saga films are the way to do it, but in this, no. The only way that I think it would work is if they did what they did at as it was the teaser from the Star Wars Celebration, where it starts the episode 4 title crawl. It gets through that first paragraph, and then all of a sudden the perspective shifts on the title crawl, and it starts zooming out, and then it zooms like super like close in to that first paragraph, where it's like they infiltrated, they stole the plans to the Death Star. It was a victory, yada yada yada, and that's when, in the teaser, you start hearing the Death Star siren and alarms and stuff going off, and then you start hearing the battle, and it zooms in. And if they did that with the episode 4 title crawl, and that's how the movie started, that would be fantastic. And then it like suddenly jumps, and it's really quiet, and you get a scene with Jin, and that's like how the movie starts. I think that would be a cool way of doing it. We'll revisit that when the movie comes out and we see what they end up doing. The second thing, and this is not the final thing, but the second thing is the Dark Troopers, or the Death Troopers, I think is the going name for them, are fascinating to me. They're essentially stormtrooper commandos, right? They are stormtroopers, but all black, really menacing, and we know that they work for Krennic. In fact, in a lot of promotional material or like written material for the movies, we are now starting to be revealed that they are advanced weapon research troopers. And the advanced weapons research team is what Krennic was rolling with, his team that he was essentially leading. So the fact that we see these dark death troopers like following around with Krennic, it could indicate that the stormtroopers that we see in Catalyst following Krennic are the same stormtroopers. It's more likely that they are more of a new thing. But the thing that makes me think that they were in Catalyst the entire time in the book, and these are the stormtroopers that have been following them around, were simply that in the flashback scene that we see Krennic finding Galen in this trailer, we see the Death Troopers in the background. So you can assume that they've been with Krennic this entire time. They are Krennic's Death Troopers, or stormtroopers, which I find fascinating. The theory that I think is interesting, but I don't think has any merit, but I've seen picking up on the internet lately, has been that in a lot of expanded universe stuff, the Dark Troopers are cyborgs or are completely droids just under the stormtrooper armor. I don't think that's how this is going to be. I think these are going to be very special stormtroopers that just follow Krennic around. And then we don't see him anymore because Krennic dies and all of his Death Troopers dies. I'm sure that there's going to be a really cool scene where either Krennic dies to Galen. I think that would be a really cool way to do it, where Galen is the one to finally shoot Krennic, or maybe Jin is the one to do it. But what I hope for is that Darth Vader walks in and just slaughters a ton of people, and Krennic is one of them. Just does the Force choke and kills him, and just slashes down the Death Troopers, and that's the end of it. That would be beautiful, and it would be really menacing, and it would be befitting of Darth Vader, which I think was exciting as a prospect for this movie. But finally, I want to talk about Jedha. So Jedha is the planet that we see in the trailer with the the knocked over statue of the Jedi, the huge statue in the background. It's the kind of the deserty planet that you see. That what we know of Jedha is that there are a lot of people who migrate or take a journey to Jedha because they are people who believe in the Force, and there are people who are worshippers of the Force, and they see the Force as that religion, and they go there as almost a pilgrimage of sorts. And what I wanted to briefly mention again as a callback to Catalyst is we know that Lyra was one of those people. And we know at least one of the people on the team is a person who thinks that the Force is real and everything, which isn't something that we necessarily see in episode 4. It's a widespread thing. Hell, even in episode 7, it's not a widespread idea that the Force is real either. When we have these large gaps of no Jedi and no Sith, it starts to phase out very, very quickly. But on the planet of Jeddah, we have these people making these pilgrimage who actually do believe that the Force is a thing and that they're essentially pushing the idea of the Force, being a thing in the galaxy on a lot of people. And that's where I think that the weapons test is going to happen. And I think it's mostly going to destroy Jeddah. I don't think it's going to blow the planet up, but I think it's going to kill everybody on it that is a Force sympathizer. And I think that's going to tie back into possibly a flashback with Lyra talking to Jyn about the Force and kind of giving her the speech there. And maybe Jyn is talking to the one guy on their team that's like, is a Force sympathetic and is just telling her like, oh, or telling him that, my mother used to believe in that nonsense or whatever. I think we're going to get a scene like that. And I think that's really important to mention because we haven't really seen any planets like this. It feels more like a what's the way to say it? It feels like an old Republic storyline where you have this planet of people who believe in the Force and go there and everything. It doesn't necessarily feel like a saga film thing. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out. And I'm curious to see how deep they go with it, or if it's just like a mentioned thing on the side. But let's summarize real quick. So Galen was behind creating, whether it was intentional or not. It was definitely unintentional to begin with, whether it's intentional in the movie because he's being forced to. He's the one who created the weapon system for the Death Star. Lyra is his wife, probably dead at this point, though we'll probably see her at one point in the movie before she dies. Jyn is their daughter and is somehow wrapped up in all of this and becomes a rebel and goes and tries to get the plans to the Death Star. Maybe she is wrapped up in all this and becomes a rebel because of her father's connection to this project. We know that Krennic is going to be a huge badass, one of my favorite villains of all time, and is going to be awesome in this movie. They chose a really good actor for it as well. Darth Vader, I really hope, is menacing and kills a ton of people. On that note, I think a lot of people are going to die at the end of this movie, and I'm looking forward to that because I think that you would have to be very confident in your story to just kill a ton of characters off that you introduced at the beginning of the movie. And then I also don't think that there will be an opening crawl, and I hope that there isn't. So that's kind of my theorizing of it. That's my summary of that. If you haven't read Catalyst, I would highly suggest it. It is so good. I mostly did the audiobook, and it was even better that way to me because the person who did it did a great job of giving the characters basically their accents that they have in the movie and kind of bringing those characters to life. And he did a fantastic job. So I would highly suggest the audiobook even, especially for someone like me who I work most of the day on whether I'm editing or doing research or recording and stuff like that. And just to have it in the background and just listening to it and on my other screen or having it on iTunes because it's in iBooks and then, switching it to my iPad when I go to bed and laying down and listening to it and stuff like that. That's the way that I got through the book. So if you don't have time to sit down and read, that's a really good way to get through it. And I would suggest the audiobook because it is fantastic. So read that book. And if you go and see Rogue One and now you're interested in Catalyst, again, it's kind of its own standalone story, though it does have a lot of connection to Rogue One, obviously. But it's the same for me. Like, I didn't go and read Bloodline until after I saw Episode 7. So I thought Bloodline gave a lot of context to Episode 7, but it wasn't necessary to watch Episode 7 after reading the book. So I think this is kind of the same idea. Go and read it though. If you have read it, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. And if you have any crazy Rogue One theories before the movie comes out, I'm likely going to do a video with the guys once they go and see the movie. The only reason I didn't do it with them for this one is because they haven't read the book and they know like maybe 10% of what I do about everything. So it's kind of hard to talk to them. It's more like talking at them when I'm talking about crazy Star Wars theories. So hopefully when they go and see it, we'll all sit down and talk about it, and maybe I'll even get the guys from our tabletop game in on it too, so it's not just me, Six, and Alex, and we'll talk about Rogue One in great detail rather. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the movie. I hope I enjoy the movie. I hope it's not bad, and we shall see you guys next time.